Welcome, everyone. I'm Lauren Hawkins. Thanks for tuning in with us to Spirituality Adventures. We are so glad you're here, and we're very excited about the content we get to share with you through our blogs and podcasts. Spirituality Adventures is made possible by your support. One way you can support us is by liking, following, subscribing, or sharing any of these podcasts or blogs that you like. Another way you can support us is by going to our website, www.spiritualityadventures.com. There you can click the support tab and you can sign up for a monthly subscription or a one-time gift. We appreciate all your support. Now here's Fred.
Welcome everybody to Spirituality Adventures. This is a non-judgmental place to explore spirituality, and we're so glad you tuned in to this episode. And today I have Michael Brooks returning with us. I think you're our first person to do a second episode, okay. Michael.
All right.
So that means you're in an elite, you're in an elite category of people. You know, cool. Only our best guests get invited back.
Second time around.
Second time. And the first time, you know, we talked about recovery issues, but this time I really wanted to talk about racial issues. Okay. And right now I'm kind of doing a series on social justice, particularly from, you know, like, well, what does social justice have to do with spirituality? Kind of an idea. And I think a lot of people don't realize that even from a biblical perspective, both the Hebrew prophets, when they talk about justice, which is one of the key words in the whole Hebrew Bible,
no doubt about it.
What they're talking about is social justice, right?
Exactly.
And then you get into Jesus's ministry, and he enacted some of that prophetic social justice stuff. And so my personal feeling is that the African American church has caught hold of that prophetic social justice message in a far deeper way than, say, in the church that I grew up in. I grew up in sort of white evangelical church. And a lot of times we were just talking about getting saved as an individual and, you know, getting our lives squared away as an individual, which is a good thing. But I didn't go to very many churches that had active like social justice ministries, and that was actually a big part of what we were talking about. And when you start studying, like when I was in Bible college, when I was in seminary, and I start studying all these things, and I realized what a huge role the Hebrew word mishpat, justice, was.
No doubt.
Then I was like, oh, dang. And so I started, I remember like one of the first people that I started reading really heavily on the social justice side of things was a guy named Jim Wallace out in Washington, D.C., and he runs a ministry called Sojourners. So that was where I really started getting into the social justice world. And that was when I was in seminary.
Wow.
And I'd already had a bachelor's in religion and was just discovering social justice ministries, you know.
That's interesting.
Isn't that crazy?
Wow.
So let's just have you do a quick introduction real quick, just in case people are tuning in who don't know you and a little bit of our history. Why don't you introduce yourself? Sure. Thanks for coming on again.
Sure. So I'm Michael Brooks, pastor of the Oasis Church, formerly known as Zion Grove Baptist Church. If you can believe it, this year will be 21 years. Man, I'm only 31, but it's been 21 years that I've been the pastor there. Last year, well, actually 2019, we decided to relocate and change the name in 2020. Then the pandemic hit. So, and then I'm also formerly a substance abuse counselor, but I also work with a number of social justice agencies like More Square, Concerned Clergy Coalition, other groups that keep this social justice issue in front of us as a people.
Excellent. And I remember we met, just reminding people, through the Green Impact Zone. I think, I think Anita Maltbia told me I needed to meet you. And I was this is a funny story, because I was at the National Prayer Breakfast, and I was asking, hey, is Michael Brooks here? And somebody said, yeah, he's here. And so it ended up being John Brooks.
Right.
That's how. And then I had to come back to Kansas City and meet you. But
it happens all the time. So how can they get me confused with short John Brooks?
Short John Brooks. Got Alvin Brooks. We got all, you know.
Right.
But And then, so we started partnering together in the urban core and did a number of things. In fact, I love that just a month or two ago, you posted a picture to your Facebook and tagged me on it. Because we had brought down, well, we did a joint service at your church at the old location of Mount Zion Grove Baptist Church. And we packed that thing out. And it was
standing room only.
Super diverse crowd, white, black. Probably some Hispanics in there as well, man.
Yeah,
and
that was amazing.
That was fun.
And that's why it came on my memory. And I thought, wow, that was maybe 15 years ago, 13, something like that. It was a while ago.
It's been a while.
But we seated 1,500, and there were people standing around the wall. So it was.
That was fun. Close. I thought that balcony might collapse up there.
It was actually that was the volunteer rally. That was for the Convoy of Hope. So that's why the crowd was so diverse. Everybody was going to volunteer the next day. And if I'm not mistaken, I think that's the next day was the day of the big rain. And we still served thousands of people who came.
We had it at Swope Park.
Swope Park, yeah.
And it wasn't just a rain.
Oh my goodness.
It was a deluge.
Yeah, it was a stream going through the tent.
I mean, it washed everything else except people still stood in line by the thousands.
When I saw them walking away with grocery bags and stuff, man, I thought, man, it spoke to the need, I think, bigger than anything we could ever have imagined, that people were hurting so much that they were willing to stand in line in the rain to get what we were offering. So that was a great time.
That was good. So I wanted to have you back this week in particular, because this is Juneteenth week. And I thought we could just use this as an opportunity to not only talk about Juneteenth and what that holiday represents, but also just, man, we're a little over a year past George Floyd, and maybe talk a little bit about where we're headed and, ups and downs and all the struggles that we still have to go through as a nation, I guess.
And I think the interesting thing, even when it comes to Juneteenth, you would think that we had, even as a people, we had a long history of celebrating it, but that's not the case. I mean, it was still even, I think, reignited in our community maybe 20 years ago. So although it happened, I remember growing up, I don't remember as a child us ever celebrating Juneteenth, but it's been something, not that it wasn't celebrated, it just wasn't celebrated here in Kansas City. And so the SCLC and some other groups who decided to put it together started it, I want to say about 20 years ago. I think it was during my tenure at Zion Grove. So, but just bringing light to that. And that also speaks to, I think, what makes this problem worse is that we don't teach history very well, and we don't teach the real history very well. And so the lack of education or the miseducation, just of people in general, black, white, or indifferent, that I think that's one of the things that keeps driving this, that people just don't know. And so when you hear something new, what seems to be new to you and for the first time is either discredited because you just never heard it before.
Right.
I think that's what we're fighting also. It's just the lack of education around issues like this.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously MLK, Martin Luther King Day, I think is, and I was always trying to celebrate that with other churches. And that's gotten some good national attention. But this Juneteenth holiday. So I didn't know about Juneteenth until I was doing Convoy with you. And I remember it might have been the second one that we did. We ended up partnering with the whole Juneteenth because we were doing it
same weekend.
And that was my first time of actually learning about what Juneteenth was. And so why don't you tell our audience a little bit, what is that? Because it's this coming Saturday, June 19th. And it is now a national holiday.
Yeah.
And I think even, I was just reading recently, I think Nike and a few other pretty big companies are starting to really feature this as a national holiday as well and get behind it.
Yeah. So although, emancipation happened, and I forget the exact date, I think it happened January of 1865, but the the information really didn't get to a lot of the people until later on. So June is when it actually made its way. The announcement made its way to Galveston, Texas, where the slaves were finally told that they were free. So imagine this news being out there for 6 months and you have no clue. So post Facebook Live and Instagram and Twitter, getting messages from Washington D.C. to Galveston, Texas by horse probably was pretty difficult. So the fact that the news got there on that day, on June 19th, is when the celebration started. So every year since then, the celebration of that announcement of the slaves actually being set free has been something that the Black community's done down through the years. Again, I think other areas and other states, other cities have done a better job, especially those in the South, which it was directly impacted. I think did a better job of keeping it part of their history. But I think here in the Midwest and some other northern cities, it just wasn't a thing until people started migrating from the South to the Midwest and to the North and started making it a thing that people started even celebrating it. Yep. So the celebration now is here in Kansas City. They've been doing it, like I said, maybe I want to say about 20 years now. I'm sure my dates could be off. But every year they actually have a week-long celebration that actually starts on June 12th, a week-long celebrations, and that's going on even this week. They had a big parade last week, and then the big celebration will be this weekend down on 18th and Vine.
18th and Vine. All right, cool. So let's talk, if we think about justice from the Hebrew Bible, if we think about, I love Amos 5, let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. That's kind of been my theme verse for this little series on social justice and spirituality. And if you think about, so how does that theme of justice that the Hebrew prophets declared over and over again was so important? How should that affect the way followers of Jesus think about racial issues in America today?
Yeah. Well, like I said, there's a number of writings when it comes to the prophets, specifically as relates to how the righteous nation or the right nation should treat the poor, and how laws are created. Even in the Old Testament, it talks about unjust laws. And so Martin Luther King didn't just quote that, on his own.
Right.
And so the prophets have always talked about how any nation or any people of God should treat those that are marginalized, those that are poor. It's amazing, again, how some scriptures we just don't teach when it comes to it. Because, I don't remember a whole lot of messages around those. It took me getting to adulthood and actually hearing some really social justice preachers that really made it part of their ministry. I remember the first time I heard Dr. Barber out of Carolina. He was, profound. I was like, where this guy been my whole life? This is the kind of stuff I wanted to hear. But I think it's just, a lack of understanding, lack of knowledge. And that's what the text says, that people perish for lack of knowledge. And sometimes the lack of knowledge has been intentional. And that's what I think I struggle with the most when it comes to America and this social justice piece and the systems that are being created. And a lot of times around, a racist background, a racist ideology, keeping people marginalized and trying to keep people down. I would love to believe that in any given situation, people are just going to do the right thing. But the reality is, even with all the facts and all the figures, we find a way to still keep some people disconnected or uninvited to the table to even talk about what needs to be done. So creating tables where people can talk, where people can gain knowledge, can understand even better what the Bible says about it. Because again, if we can't take a moral stance, you can argue all the other stances. But when you take a moral stance and say the church should be doing more, the church needs to be doing more, now your argument is against God. It's not against, just my opinion. So that's and then Jesus comes with the gospel and talks, even when they're arguing amongst themselves, he said, well, the poor you're gonna have with you always. Yeah, so there should be a ministry to the poor. Everything he did, interesting, most of his ministry didn't happen inside the temple. And, he went to the temple to worship, but most of his interaction with people was with poor people, with sick people, with demon possessed folks. It wasn't meet with a whole bunch of spiritual potentates in the temple,
right?
So we're gonna follow his example. I'm not sure we can follow his example without having a heart for the poor and trying to help them in their situations.
You bet, yeah. In so many kind of marginalized. I mean, I actually just released a blog just a few days ago about what is radical inclusion, and I subtitled it "A Gospel for Misfits."
Wow.
And Luke's gospel really features that big time.
Yeah.
It's the only gospel that has the Good Samaritan story in it.
All of that. Yeah.
Who do you invite to the banquet table?
Yeah.
Friend of sinners.
Yeah.
Jesus is constantly hanging out with the wrong crowd.
Yeah.
He's hanging out with the people that would get him contaminated.
Exactly.
So you think, how can you be? And he had more confidence that a grace-filled relationship or grace-filled community had more power to heal.
Oh, no doubt.
Than a person who's a misfit had to contaminate.
Yeah. And would put himself in what society would say dangerous situations, and his disciples even question him sometimes. You sure you really want to?
Right.
Do you know who's sitting at the dinner with you?
Yeah.
And they're trying to put, Mary Magdalene out of the supper because, she don't fit in there. So even his followers didn't get it a lot of times.
Right.
Which again, I think it mirrors what's going on even with us right now. But sometimes, and it doesn't mean you're not a follower of Christ. It just means that some stuff you may just miss because you haven't had the right instruction. And they're right there with him all day, every day. And they're still saying, no, the woman with the issue of blood never would have got to Jesus if it was left up to him. The little boy who came says when he says suffer the little children, it was because they were trying to keep the little children away from him. So I think all that mirrors what we should be doing with the gospel now. That we should be trying to reach those that society says, nah, you know what, just leave them over there. Just kind of leave them alone. And our response should be the same. No, those are the people that we want at the table. Those people that we need to be ministering to.
Yeah, I think about even the Great Commission. Like, make disciples of who?
Oh, yeah.
Like everybody, right?
Everybody.
All
nations.
All nations. You think about Galatians 2:28. In Christ, there's not male or female, Jew or Gentile, slave or free. It breaks it. Like there's. So there is a calling on Jesus followers,
right,
to break down barriers that divide.
Exactly, and so again, I'm questioning. This is just where I'm at. I'm questioning a whole lot of the theological teaching that we've gotten. In that, I'm not sure. Again, we were taught the entire perspective because I just don't believe you can have two groups of folk who say they love God and see society in such a totally different way. And that's a struggle, even for me. This whole George Floyd thing, the whole election from last year, all this stuff made me start questioning everything that we've held on to as our, Christian principles. We're all following the same ones. How can we be looking at the same thing and see it so differently? That's been bothering me for quite a while.
Yeah, I would guess, I don't know how to say this, but there's obviously been a big difference along a lot of lines between, let's say, the black evangelical church in America and the white evangelical church in America.
No doubt.
The passages that the preachers preach from, the way they see the world,
no doubt about it,
the way they view life.
Yeah.
There's a big difference. And until I just started intentionally hanging out with pastors, from the core and you and Hispanic pastors and hearing your journey, your perspectives, man, I had a pretty white, I'd been in pretty white, dominantly white schools, institutions, churches, And I always had friends, I went to high school ran track with, I was always friends with people that were in my class that were black, but there just weren't very many of them.
Yeah, exactly.
And they were in white institutions, right? Many times.
Yeah.
And so, but I think it's never been so stark. Because I've been attending before the pandemic, I was attending over at Macedonia Baptist. It was a historically black church, and I went through first time ever. I went through Black History Month in a black church as a white guy.
Wow.
So now I'm the minority, right? And it was so powerful.
Yeah.
I really loved it. And but man, I thought, gosh, there's just so much of that experience that I was never exposed to.
Exactly.
Never exposed to.
Yeah.
And it's so rich.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So rich. So one of the things that stood out when I went through Black History Month as a white guy in a black church was how long the struggle has been.
Oh man, yeah. Yeah.
And how there still is so far to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think about how I don't even know how to say this. If I get mistreated in certain situations, I'm pretty quick to point it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And not want to put up with it.
Yeah.
And I think about the black church and how they have endured with hope and forgiveness. Like the resiliency of the African American church fighting a fight for justice, battling for the kind of justice that we're talking about that's in the Bible, enduring mistreatment for generations, but still forgiving and still having hope.
Yeah.
And still calling themselves to the higher road. I mean, that is unbelievable in my mind.
And to be honest with you, it is also on the other side, some of the driving forces behind a lot of young people that don't want to be a part of the black church anymore. Their feeling is, so if you hear all the negative input when it comes to the Black Lives Matter movement, is just that they're too radical. And they're saying, well, look, we've been nice long enough. That didn't mean we're going to go out and start shooting people. But I think that's the fear. The fear that I think some whites have is, what happens if they start treating us like we treated them? I don't believe that's ever going to happen. But as long as that fear is there, it's going to keep you guarded and keep you sheltered because you don't know. But the history has proven we're not the ones that's going to pick up a bunch of guns and kill a bunch of people, in a lot of instances. And again, I think good, better, and different. I think a lot of young people are saying, well, how long are we going to keep turning the other cheek? How long are we going to keep the gospel is, and the teaching that the Bible has, I think black folks have taken it to heart. And not that we shouldn't have. We should be forgiving. We're not going to get to where we need to be, staying angry about the past. I can be a poster child for that one. But it's just not gonna serve you well. But I also think there needs to be space for people to speak their truth and to be honest about what they're struggling with. And I don't think those spaces have been, I don't think there've been enough spaces. And these young folks are saying, well, I'm not asking for a seat at the table anymore. I'm gonna create my own table, or I'm gonna take a seat. And so some of what they do can be brash and can be considered disrespectful. But like you said, how long do we stay nice? How long do we? And the scripture's still true. I mean, how many times should I forgive my brother? Well, you just keep on doing it. That's what the teaching says. But we're dealing with about 3 or 4 generations of young people that weren't raised in church now. And so their perspective and their take on things is not going to be like my mother's and father's, my grandmother, grandfather, or even mine. And I think that's part of the issue as well, that if everybody's coming from a different foundation, we used to take for granted that this was a Christian nation. Everybody kind of had Christian principles. Well, I think everybody would probably have an argument against that based on the last couple of years that we've had to endure.
Yeah. Hey, Matt, I'm going off air here, but Matt Cox is my videographer guy. Can you look up, or Whitney, can you look up the last year, right after the George Floyd thing, there was a guy, a white evangelical guy, the creator of Veggie Tales. Mm-hmm. And I'm blanking on his name right now. But he did if you can find his name and pull it up, I want to. Phil Vischer? Yeah, Phil Vischer. Mm. He's the creator of Veggie Tales. Okay. So like white evangelical parents raise their kids on Veggie Tale Bible stories. Yeah. Okay. These little vegetables, cucumbers, and that would tell Bible stories. And this whole generation of kids grew up on Veggie Tales. Okay. Well, this Phil Vischer, who's the creator of Veggie Tales, did about a 17-minute video on white privilege. Yeah. And he put it together historically as well as I've ever seen it put together. Now, there's a documentary on Netflix that's really good too. It focuses on the prison system side of the thing. Okay. But he covered everything. He covered the prison system stuff. He covered the the housing districting stuff. He covered a lot of the history of some of these deeply rooted injustices in our systems. Yeah. And he's like the poster kid for white evangelicals, and he just nailed it. And this thing had millions and millions of views. Wow. And I even had friends of mine who were like, there's not any such thing as white privilege and all this. I said, just do me a favor, take 20 minutes and just watch this video and then let's talk. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Because they haven't spent, the hundreds of hours I've spent with people like yourself listening to stories and all this kind of stuff. But, one of the things, and we've talked about this before, but one of the things that struck me with your story, and all of my black pastors could tell similar stories. Number one, I don't have a single friend that's a black pastor who doesn't have his own stories of mistreatment. Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. By police officers, and again, we, you and I both support the police force. Right. And they're largely good, but we at the same time we realize that, hey, there's still need for reform and things that are out there. And so, but not only do all of you have those kind of stories, but you all have had to raise your children in a way that protects them from the potential of mistreatment that is out there.
As much as possible. Yeah. I mean, and
this is something every black family in America has to do, is raise their kids with an extraordinary sense of the potential fear that's out there for these kind of situations. And of course, Lord George Floyd captures that, it's on video in front of the world. And it was that incident, but it's what that incident represented historically is what was so powerful about it, right?
Yeah. And I think the image itself, and so the image that's been, photobombed over and over again is Chauvin just sitting there with his knee on his neck, and he's actually looking up at the crowd with almost like a scowl, like, what you gonna do about it? That's the history of Black America. Mm-hmm. That, we understand these injustices. We understand this stuff's been going on. I don't think anybody, well, there's a few people that may have been living under a rock that I run across every now and then that had no idea we have a racial problem in America. I'll say, okay, there's a few. But for the most part, folks know you don't have to be told that what he did was wrong. Mm-hmm. You don't have to be told. And I don't care what George Floyd did. Whatever he did didn't deserve to cost him his life. Unless he had a gun and actually killed somebody, that's the only way it can be justified. And that wasn't the case. Mm-hmm. At the very least, he may have passed a bad check or something, whatever it was. Yep. Whatever it was, it just wasn't enough. But George Floyd was just one of hundreds. And that's, George Floyd was a tipping point. It wasn't just that incident. It was all the incidents that continue to happen over and over again. And in most instances, the officer was getting off with no punishment whatsoever. That's what you heard. That's what you had. And I think George Floyd was just a perfect storm, because people have been quarantined and locked up in their houses for about 2 months by the time May 25th came around last year. And getting out the house was just, okay, if this way to get out the house, go protest, I'm going to go protest. Now, I don't know if that was everybody, but a lot of the crowds, although they were protesting George Floyd, it was also a protest against what was going on in America at the same time.
Yeah.
And so it was, as horrible as it was, I think it was absolutely necessary for our country, for people who have all these years decided or have concluded that there's not a problem. And then the crowds were so diverse. It wasn't just black people saying this is wrong.
Right.
It was America saying, we got to do something about this.
I went to several rallies in Kansas City at all different locations, and some in the core, in the historically black neighborhoods. And there were more white people at every rally that I went to by far. I mean, they outnumbered the whites outnumbered the blacks in every rally I went to by a big margin,
no doubt,
actually.
No doubt.
And I was like so thankful, not for the context of it, but just grateful to see how many people were out there saying, "Hey, this matters. We can't keep living with this kind of racial tension, racial injustice, racial hatred. Man, we got to do better. We got to do better.
And I think
we got to live up to our highest ideals, right?
And I think the hope for this generation is just like you were saying. I think there's so many young white people that can say, I have some friends. It's not like I'm not living in this bubble where I have no context whatsoever. So you got a lot of college students, had a lot of, a lot of neighborhoods have become a lot more diverse than they ever have been. A lot of schools have become a lot more diverse. And so they were saying, no, I have friends. I have people that I'm really close to. And if they need me to stand up for them, then that's what I'm going to do. That's where a lot of diversity came from. I think there's been a whole lot more exposure to the black culture than maybe any other century we've been living in. And so thank God for the young people that are willing to step out there and do something. And it's time. And it's high time. It's 2021, and I wish we were having to fight new fights, but it seems to be the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, and I mean, if you think about just practically, people think, "Gosh, it's just a big issue," and there's a lot of people out there that aren't that engaged politically. Yeah. And so if you think, well, what can we do to make a difference even in our little corner of the world? And I always like to boil it down to like even what just everybody, maybe a few things that anybody can do. You and I have talked about this before, but I just like to hit that again as we're thinking about Juneteenth and what can people do? What do you think?
Well, just like what I said, I think whether you become friends or not, at least expose yourself to somebody and be open to listening to their stories. Because like you said, I'm not sure you're going to find any African-American, not necessarily just the police, but just injustice in general, whether it was on a job, whether it was in a grocery store, whether it was, in the housing market trying to buy a house and couldn't, even get shown one in certain neighborhoods. Those things, again, in today's society, is still going on. And so take time to just talk to somebody that doesn't mind sharing their stories and at least just be open to a different perspective. I think that's a good start. That you can, without reading a book, and you can talk to 10 of us. You're probably going to get 10 different stories. So, there's not any one of us that's going to represent the entire, community. But all of us could probably tell you some stories about some injustices that have happened. Yeah.
Yeah. So I still always, love to chat. If you attend a church, get involved with churches that are in the core. These holidays present an opportunity to partner and make new friends.
No doubt about it.
So I think, like get involved with other churches and create diversity around Martin Luther King events, Juneteenth events, and let those friendships carry themselves into, the next year and the next year. And then those present opportunities. They unfold over time.
No doubt.
And I think it changes your perspective. It changes your kids' perspectives. Every relationship matters. Every relationship counts. So yeah, I think the friendship, intentionally being intentional about the relationships that we build, that we include diversity in our friendships and in our relationship is a huge piece. What are some other ways that you could think of that?
Well, as you were saying, when it comes to the churches, I think you would find most African American pastors would be grateful to have a diverse congregation. I don't necessarily want my whole congregation to be African Americans, because again, they don't get exposed either. If you look at it, the truth of the matter is a whole lot of people that live in urban core don't interact with a whole lot of white people on a regular basis. So, their perspective could be skewed even when it comes to how they see, you all. So it's not just you giving, it's also a give and take. I think we can all learn from each other a whole lot better. Like you said, the holidays and celebrations, that's always a pretty easy interaction. Anything's going on in public. And I think Kansas City is really, it should be more diverse than it is, because we have almost every nationality there is, and people don't know it. But right here in Kansas City, we've got a wide variety of nationalities and ethnic groups that you would never even know until you expose yourself to that reality. Yeah.
Yeah. One way for people to think about it might be this. If somebody out there is in a church, chances are that church probably supports a missionary to some country somewhere, right?
Yeah,
and then
more than likely.
And then if you just find out which country that is, there's probably a few thousand of those people right here, right in our backyard.
No doubt about it.
And so that those opportunities for missions, for culture, for food. Yep. Hey, for nothing else, just learn to love other people's food.
Yeah, right. Expose yourself to something else. And for us, something that's not going to kill you later on in life with all the fried chicken. And not that I won't go there, but a lot of fried food that we eat could be adjusted if we experience some other culture's food. I think our kids are also, I think, the most promising ground that we can use, because again, they're intentionally have to be diverse in how they see things. My son plays basketball, so he's all over the city playing all kind of different teams and experiencing different cultures. And now that we're in Blue Springs, it's a little different than being in Raytown. But I think it's what's needed. If we're not intentional about it and actually try to make things more diverse than they are, it's easy to keep things where they are. That's the safe thing to do. I don't think there's anything nowhere in the Bible where the Bible says we should be safe. Matter of fact, most passages are going to be talking about having courage and and stepping out on faith and doing things nobody else would do. And if the faith community doesn't do it, I'm not sure our society has a better way. So I would just encourage people of faith to extend that faith beyond your little circle and reach out to people who may not look like you or do things the way you do, and see why they do the things the way they do. Because like I said, most of us have a story as to why I do what I do and why I have that attitudes that I have.
Yeah. I mean, just through the pandemic, I was jumping in on your messages, your Sunday morning and your Wednesday nights. And I've heard quite a few of your messages now. You're a very good Bible teacher too, by the way. Very good. Yeah. And so I think that's a cool thing, is that I think one of the positives from the pandemic is that it forced a lot of pastors to get online and start but then that opens up the world, and so people can jump online and hear your messages and hear how your love for Jesus, and hear your look, Jesus is here to help tear down these barriers and these walls, and unite us around that. You know?
And I think that's been one of the blessings of even the pandemic. I mean, we've been able to speak to people we never would have had a chance to if we weren't doing it virtually. You know, there's people from California to New York that just, and some of them's family, but a lot of folks I never heard of, you know, never seen before. And so that may be another tool that you can use. There's tons of African American churches online all the time. You can go through YouTube or Facebook and scroll down line. If you don't like what they're talking, you just click and go to the next. A lot of times that's better than going to church because sometimes you're kind of stuck there till he gets through. But in this world, you can click to 3 or 4 different services on any given Sunday, and I do myself. Tell you the truth, I'm looking as well.
So one, I don't know why this happened, but when I was a young pastor in training, I would listen to black pastors, E.V. Hill and others. Yeah. E.V. was probably one of my favorites, but I had a whole message of his memorized, right? And who were some of your favorite? Because these messages, people can hear these pastors online, and they really are a treasure because they preach a lot different than I do.
No doubt about it. Yeah, he's probably one of my favorites too. When I started preaching, I was actually living in Alaska. And up there, you kind of forced to mix the culture. It's not a whole lot of black radio stations in Alaska, so I was listening to the Christian stations up there, and that's where I fell in love with E.V. Hill too. It was a sad occasion, but I have the eulogy of his first wife's funeral. I have it almost memorized. He did it, and they did it on, I want to say, Chuck Swindoll's program, Focus on the Family, and he did it as a fan. It was all about family. So that was one. There was a guy in Houston that came to do a revival in Alaska almost every year, and I just drew a blank on his name, but he's Johnny Youngblood is another one that just had a different. When it came to social issues and believing that the church's job was to have social ministries, Caesar Clark is just one of the favorites of most African-American pastors, just his delivery and the power that he had. I think that's the thing about, the black experience is, when you're feeling weak and powerless and hopeless, sometimes the power behind the words was what was most inspiring. And then a lot of younger guys, I'll say younger now because they were young when I was young, but we all in our 60s now. So we're not as young as we used to be. But just a lot of just being exposed to a lot of the preachers in the National Baptist Convention that you never would have heard of on a national level, that just, had a particular way of just presenting the gospel. And it was just interesting how the diversity of styles, but the content and the impact was almost the same. But I would say E.V. Hill, Johnny Youngblood, some of the younger ones, the Church Without Walls, Rock West down in Houston. I was exposed to a lot of preachers in Dallas while I was in Texas at the time. So a lot of preachers there. E.K. Bailey, he has a preachers conference every year where he was emphasizing expository preaching and really breaking down Greek and Hebrew. And that's kind of where I learned that discipline, just going to schools like that. Yeah. So it's just been, but those probably some of the main ones in the last couple of years that really had a major impact on me.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, good. Well, I just wanted to encourage people to be mindful of Juneteenth, to reflect on the struggle that we still have in front of us, but how also, we have a hope. And the spirituality component is that, all of the great faith traditions have some connection to social justice, but probably none as powerful as the Hebrew prophet tradition. Taken right into the ministry of Jesus. And so this is a mandate for Jesus followers.
No doubt.
Racial reconciliation and equality and all of these things is a mandate for Jesus followers.
Yeah, it has to be. And reconciliation is really what we're supposed to be about. I can't see a better way to practice it than reconciling the racists and making sure that we don't keep perpetuating the same evil that's been passed down to us down through the years.
Right.
And, what better way to do it than celebrate the freedom and celebrate not just Jesus getting up from the cross, but also the slaves getting set free. So and making a connection even.
Yeah, it's it is the gospel. Yeah. Freedom, right? Set free from bondage.
No doubt.
That is a rich history in the Black church in America. Is that theme runs? Yeah,
that freedom piece and that direct connection between what the children of Israel went through coming out of Egypt. I think that's the connection now that's one thing we will do on a very consistent basis. Make the connection between the children of Israel were slaves in Egypt,
right?
And they cried that God would let them go, and so he sends Moses, and so that direct connection between that freedom and our freedom from slavery has always been a line that's been drawn for us.
And that freedom is commemorated every year in the Passover.
Yeah.
How many years ago was slavery in Egypt for the Jewish people?
But they still,
and yet we commemorate that every year. We were slaves. That's what we were slaves. So there is a continuity with those in history. There's a continuity we stand with those who are oppressed. We stand with those who have fought for freedom.
If we can get to the place where it's a we thing, it's not I don't think it wasn't just Black people that got free. If you use a broader mentality, we all got free. We all got free from making that okay. So even the ones that released us got free from the mentality. Now again, the systems have been put in place to kind of keep a lot of that stuff going on without without slavery being legal anymore. But the knowledge that everyone should be free, everybody should have access to everything, and all men are created equal. Those principles now can be lived out because we don't have that slave mentality constantly over our head. And so everybody was free, not just African Americans, but the mentality of being free was something that we can say we as a people experienced, not just one group of people.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Michael, for joining us on Spirituality Adventures again and for this podcast. And I would just encourage everybody to be mindful of Juneteenth and to use it as an opportunity to reflect and to connect with friends that are different than you and to celebrate unity and diversity. So thanks for joining in. Thanks for being a part of this podcast and Spirituality Adventures, and we will see you next time.
Thanks again for tuning in. Remember to visit our support page at www.spiritualityadventures.com. If you like what you heard, be sure to share it and leave a comment. Thanks again. Have a great day.
Harbin Media Production.